sull'officina scritto l'aviatore, per l'Africa partire dovrò, e mentre stringe la sua mamma al cuore, nascondere una lacrima non può.
Alright, it's time to start another model. Now this is not the model I intended to build next originally. I actually have a whole bunch in my queue where I really want to get to them, but for one reason or another I cannot start them right away. So I know that I'm really close to starting those other ones, but I wanted to do something really quick in the meantime. So I've got this Macchi C.205 Veltro, which is an old Italian World War II era plane. And actually I had at one point 3 kits of the same plane, and I still have 2. I've got a Hobby Hasegawa 148 scale, and I've got this 172, and at one point I had a third which I gave away to somebody else. Anyhow, I said I'm going to pick the smaller one right now from this unknown company because if anything, I'll learn something before I build the other one. So let's take a peek inside. Again, I know nothing about this company. This is quite an old kit from what I understand on Scalemates, which I've put the link to in my notes. And I have no idea what the quality is. I have no idea if there's decals. Let's find out. Okay. So these 3 Macchis were given to me. Well, they were sold to me by a friend of mine who saw that I was getting into models, and he said, "Look, I want to get rid of some models over here." And he showed me all 3, and he says, "You want to, get them?" And he gave me a really reasonable price. So I said, "Sure." Even though they're the same, I could have fun with these kits. So again, I don't know too much about the plane, other than they seem to have some, like, one of those weird paint schemes, depending on which exact era of the plane that you're looking at, that has, just basically lines squiggled across the whole plane over here. So I'm not sure if I'm going to paint it that way. I looked at a few schemes. I think I'm going to try this weird scheme where you just go with a airbrush and try to make these fine, hard to say, cloud bursts as along the top of the fuselage here. So you can see that there's again, there's Italians had, this is an Italian plane, but in the war there was also Germans had them at one point, the Luftwaffe. So there's some decals over here I can see for the Luftwaffe. These are Italian decals, and these are also Italian decals from like a different era. Same here and same here. So we'll see which one I end up doing. I probably will go with the Italian one. Why not? And again, I know nothing about this company's Supermodel. Whoop. Oh, little rubber, gotta be careful, little rubber tires over here. This looks like just a clear base and a little small cockpit over here. Again, it's a small plane, not too many parts, and that's just what I was looking for, something for a quick build. Not too much flash on here. Decent detail, I guess you can say. It seems to be raised panel lines, not the best, but I think I can do something with it. So let's start. Okay, I'm just a few minutes into my build of the Veltro over here. Veltro meaning Greyhound in Italian. And again, apparently this was one of the very best planes that the Regia Aeronautica had during the war, made by the Italians. Some of the Germans, as I think I mentioned, flew them as well. And even some Croatians had them at one point in the war. But the thing I want to talk about, these decals, and this comes down to also a fact of, during the war there was Italian armistice, and basically the north and the south of Italy split their allegiances during the war. The north remaining with Germany, and the south aligning themselves with the Allied forces. And this comes back to these decals, which wasn't too clear before. Like, these are the older Italian markings, the insignia before the armistice, and when they split, these ones, these rondelles, which these green parts would go in, these were used for the south, the so-called co-belligerent air force. But about these decals is the problem is they're not decals, they're not stickers. What these are the old style what we called rub-on transfers, and basically you would take this sheet, put it where you want it and then just rub down the surface, and that would stick to whatever was below it. But unlike decals, there's no play that you have. Basically, once you start rubbing it on, it's going to come off. You can't move it around. You'll break them, and so you have to be very careful. You have basically one try once you start, and that's it. And I actually did the first one over here, which is just the interior cockpit. And again, I was, off by a bit, and kind of stuck with that, really. So I'm not too crazy about it. I could use some, choice, voice my displeasure by using some choice Italian words, but I want to keep this a family-friendly channel, so I will dispense with that. And another thing I tried was the micro solid, just to see if I can, soften the edges. And it does soften the edges, but then it just actually cracks along the surface over here. So again, I'm not even sure if that's going to work when I go for the larger ones on the fuselage. But enough about the decals. I wanted to talk about some raised injection points. And here's an example on this chair over here. They're quite prominent. And again, I'll have to file that down so little Luigi over here can fit in that seat. But there's a lot in the body itself that I'm not sure if I need to file them down or sand them down, because again, this would go in there. But is that going to affect the positioning or take up space so that this will no longer fit once it's all closed up? So I'll have to probably sand these down or file them down just to be sure. So a little extra work on that end. And then I wanted to talk about the instructions. And again, positioning that part over there. I don't know if you can see this or make sense of it. It is very, very vague where everything goes. There's like this stick number 5 over here. It says that this goes down here, but there's no, pinhole for that stick. It's just, good luck with it. I don't like the style of this instruction sheet. This should have been, 3-4 panels where it's clear where everything goes. And it's just, it's one of those things where let's put everything on 1 or 2 graphics and you figure it out. So not too crazy about that either. I could use some choice words there. I want to talk, let's go on something nice about the kit. So some people, what they end up doing is, you can see on these wingtips, they're already they've been, there's points where you can put something in the wingtips for the lights, and they've already taken off that. And basically what they did is they give you this clear, which you end up putting into those recesses, and then you put either green or red clear later on. And this is something people modify their models when they don't have that. It's a nice clean modification, but what's nice to see is they've already done it for you, so it makes that a little bit easier on this kit. And I wanted to mention again some of the surfaces, what you can encounter. And basically, if you could see here, there's, the flat, nice clean over here. And this is all kind of raggedy. It kind of looks like burlap, really. And that's what it's really mimicking, a fabric that was used on the flaps, the rudder, and the elevators. And I'm not too sure if I like that. It seems to be more exaggerated than anything else. But I think I'm going to let it go as is. And hopefully after I prime it, I'll have an idea if they need to be sanded down or not. I'm probably just going to leave them as is. And the one thing I didn't mention before, again, because you have these nice little rubber tires over here, is I will be making this model on the ground. Just going to make a little simple base, nothing too fancy, as I've done before for some of the other planes I've done in the past. So let's hope we don't run into too many more issues. All right, let's talk about the good, the bad, the ugly of our Macchi Veltro over here. So I've come a long way. The good is the kit is not, absolutely terrible, but that does have its issues. As you can see, I've done a lot of putting and sanding and trying to make it look as nice as possible. So the ugly is kind of these things over here, like these buckles over here, the folding wings. The bottom is a single piece, so they're nice and clear, but again, because they put them right at the seam, they kind of look ugly up on top over here. I've done my best to try to, scribe them and gouge them out, but it's not going to be the best. But overall, it's not too bad. Now, the really bad parts of this plane, of master cockpit canopy over here, and this is absolutely terrible. I was very dismayed when I did it, dry fit over here, and you can't see it now, but I took a photo, and there's a huge gap putting that there, and basically this canopy does not conform to the rear of the plane, the profile over here. It's just a terrible, terrible mismatch, and there's not much I can do about that. It's a clear plastic. I don't know. I'll try maybe some of that clear, micro crystal clear, and see if I can close that gap once it's in there, because I want to have a closed canopy, but there's not much I can do. Aside from that, I'm just about ready to paint and prime and paint it. There's a few other smaller pieces on the on the sprue. I've kept the pilot out because I know that I can put them in later, and it'll make it easier to mask off that area before I do the priming and the painting. And one other thing about this kit, which I thought was kind of cool, was the base over here is a clear, but their logo of Supermodel is actually embossed with like kind of ridges over here. So I was able to go back in and just put some acrylic red, even though I'm not going to use the base, and I thought it would be cool if I can put that red and then maybe paint it white over here, and you'll basically have that logo from the kit, and then I could set it beside the plane when I display it. Basically maybe cut off this piece or something. And I just thought it was kind of neat, and I had to try to see if I can do that, and it so far it looks pretty good. But now I'll put the white, and we'll see if it comes out really, really nice, and if it's usable for display purposes only. So, continue with the build. Okay, in my last segment I mentioned that there was this large gap in the canopy and there was nothing I can do. What I meant to say was there's really not much I can do with the canopy, because it's really hard to say, file it down and reshape a canopy. But what I could do, and what I've done now, is to reshape the fuselage so that it meets up with that canopy contour. And basically it was, many iterations of putting it up, sanding, putting it, sanding, until slowly it built up and it just meets up with the canopy shape. Now, I don't like to do that because you're really changing the shape of the plane, because there's usually, in this plane here, there's a concave over here where it meets the canopy. But again, there's no concave on the canopy, so I had no choice to do it on the fuselage. And quite frankly, I'm happy the way it came out. Right now, there's really hardly any gap at all, at least, the best of my ability. And it's so much better than before. So, I've stuck on, put Luigi in there, our little pilot, and I've stuck on the canopy. I've glued it on with some PVA glue over here so that it doesn't fog up the clear, both pieces. And I've, created a little mask. I think I mentioned it before. I made my own masks for the individual windows on that canopy. And that's going to be the way it is. It's not going to be removable or anything. It's going to stay that way. So the next thing I tackled was the wingtip lights. Now, I mentioned the kit came with some clear, which I thought was really cool, that they would provide it. And I tried fitting them in, these little pieces over here, and it was a terrible, terrible, terrible fit. So as I also mentioned in the last segment, sometimes people used to do this on their own when there was no wingtip lights at all, and they would, make that notch in the wingtips and then use clear sprue and basically make their own lights. So I decided to make my own. I mean, it wasn't going to look any worse than the kit supplied ones, and so usually they use clears, a clear sprue for that. But since I had some red sprue and some green sprue, although this is a very light green, it should be a lot darker, I decided to use those sprues and made the cleared the notches, make sure they were perfect, or at least as good as possible, some 90-degree notch. And then I took little bits of the sprue itself, made sure that two sides were at 90 degrees, really oversized. glue them in there, let that glue dry, because you have to go back in then afterwards and file it. And then once it gets pretty close, then you're, basically polishing it to match the shape of the wings. And you use very fine grit at the end, so it's basically you get back that translucent effect on the sprue itself. And it worked really, really, really nice. You can see this red, it's almost perfect. Really, there was no way I was going to get that with the kit supplied ones. And because I'm using the red over here, this one will be okay. When I'm going to be painting it, this will be all masked off. And now the green is still a little light for the green, but I can always put, what other people usually do when they use clear sprue is they paint it with some clear green translucent paint afterwards. So very, very happy with that. The one thing I should mention is sometimes what people do is they drill a little hole in there to mimic the light or the lamp in the wingtip itself, and you can see that little lamp in there. And I didn't do that, but honestly, I regret it, because the only reason I didn't do it was I said, this is my first try, let me keep it simple. But this worked out so nice that I wish I'd tried that other technique to make it just even a little bit better. Anyhow, everything is done right now, so we're finally ready to prime and paint this little plane and go on to the next step. All right, so how many of you were laughing during that last segment? As I was actually recording it, two questions came to mind. Whether I got the orientation of the lights, the green and the red, on the correct sides, and also whether this plane actually had a red and a green, because I'm not sure what point this became a standard on planes, and whether, this plane actually had any lights at all. I mean, the kit had the notches, but, was that correct or not? So I did a little research, and of course I got them wrong. So I had to go back and, do them over again, which wasn't too bad. Again, like I mentioned before, they're not hard to do this. And I guess I said, because I'm going to be redoing it now, I'll get a chance to try what I said I regret not doing. And that was, drilling a fine hole in there to mimic the actual light. And so I went online and I found out, again, the wrong sides. And also, it was around World War II when the red and the green came into play. And I know that some Americans, at least towards the end of the war, they had that scheme. They were using that scheme, but I wasn't sure about the Italian ones. Now, there are not too many pictures of the Macchi itself, so it was hard to say, especially color pictures, to say if it had it. Although I did find a picture to clearly show that the Macchi had these wingtip lights on them. So I decided, look, I'm not sure. I could not find out one way definitive, one way or the other, whether it had the red and the green, but I'll do with the red and the green. And then if you look closely with the, you can actually now see that it looks like there's a little lamp in there. So that worked out, again, really, really nice. I'll try to get some better pictures, but you can see there, if you look really, really close, you can see that it looks like there's a lamp in there. So again, I'm happy with that. And for the umpteenth time right now. Oh, by the way, I used a 0.8 millimeter pin vise drill bit to make those little notches. Again, you go into like a millimeter or so, and make sure when you are drilling it in, because again, you're doing it when it's still a larger piece that still has to be filed down, make sure you take into consideration the contour and make sure it won't pop out of the contour over there. So again, for the umpteenth time, I think I'm ready to start priming and painting now. All right, as you can see, I've painted our plane over here. I wanted something a little darker than, like a tan. I had Tamiya deck tan, and I wanted something a little darker. So what I did was I added a few drops of the Tamiya brown to it. Luckily, I had another jar and just mixed up my own batch and came up with this. And again, I'm trying to look at reference photos to see, how brown it was, and there aren't that many around. But I did, come up with something I'm happy with. Now, I think I mentioned I wanted to try some weird paint schemes, and they have this thing where a lot of planes, not just the Italian planes, other nations as well, where they kind of had these, I don't know how to say, like they hand painted like kind of a patches on these planes. And so I said, well, how can I do that? I didn't really want to go in with a airbrush to that, especially that small, to try to do that. I don't have the skill to do that. So I said, let me see what I can do with markers. I tried a few. What I did is I took a sample over here and used that paint to give me a base so I can do some practice on it to see what the different markers would look like. The first one down here is this marker, and it's not too bad, except one thing I noticed about this marker is whenever I lift it, when I get to the end of the scheme, the patch, and I lift my marker, there's a distinct, much darker dot, and you can't remove it without making a mess of things. So I wasn't too happy with this one. This one is actually a gel pen that another modeler once recommended do some fine work on some other models, and it works for some things, but I noticed when I tried to use it on this, and one thing I should say, I don't have a primer under here, and it may have made a difference, but basically as I use this gel marker, it kind of removes the paint at times, and I actually even waited much longer to see, it was just because maybe I didn't leave this to dry long enough, and I came back later and I tried it, and it did it less, but it still did it. So I'm not, I don't think I should be using this gel pen. So the only other option I had was this much thicker marker. And again, it was a little thicker than I wanted, but at least it seems to do the job fairly well. In some cases too, I got to be careful, because if I wait too long and draw too slowly, I will have a dot wherever I lift that pen. But it's not too noticeable here as it is down here. So I'm going to try it with that. And again, when I'm looking at the reference photos, sometimes these patches are much smaller, sometimes they're bigger. So I had to say, well, I want to try to be consistent as I do this thing, so I'm kind of worried. So I looked at one plane in particular as a reference photo that I'll be using, and hopefully I have, not too many issues with this marker. The plane, finished off the propeller. This is all airbrushed, and did a little hand painting for this over here. I don't know I can't remember if they're guns or not, or if it's just no. Actually, this is the engine exhaust sputtering out off to the side. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna use the marker to try to make that pattern that I wanted. And then before applying the decals and the panel line accents, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some future over the top of that. And then once it dries and it's basically now a gloss at that point, I can use the panel line accents. And I'll probably go back in afterwards and repaint this as a matte, because I don't want it really to be a glossy plane. I still have a few, the landing gear and a few other small parts that have to be attached to this thing, but not too much. And I've also made one of my really cheap tarmac bases, if you want to call it that. I actually made like 3 or 4 at the same time, just cutting this out. This is just craft paint over here with a slight groove and a marker in between. And it's, kind of like at an angle from a tarmac, or, no matter how you put the plane. So I'm getting a little closer there, and a little bit more to do. All right, now that I've gone in with my marker and made my my paint scheme, my patches, I just want to say something before I put on the gloss. And basically I want to show you how it turned out, and it's very nice. Really happy the way it turned out. Some things that you have to remember is once you start your pattern, keep that same size. So once you get going, don't start saying, oh, this should be bigger or smaller. Just maintain the pattern that you've started with to be consistent throughout. And, be careful when you get to the edge or the contours over here to make sure it goes and flows to make one patch. So I'm really happy the way that turned out. And I can now go ahead with the gloss and then do the panel line accents. About these patterns over here, I looked at some reference photos and to see whether they are, throughout the whole plane. Some don't have it on the bottom, some do, and then some of them have it on the landing gear, the panels that go on the side of landing gear, some don't. So I said I won't be putting it on my landing gear. So really, really happy with it. One thing I should mention that I didn't mention before is that I did put a piece of lead in there to balance it out if needed. I'm not sure if I really did need it, but I better safe than sorry. So I did stick a piece of lead in there and then glued it in. And then another thing I want to clarify is that at one point, I think at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that Veltro was Greyhound, but that's not a word translation. That just means that, this Veltro itself was known as a Greyhound airplane, supposedly by the Italians. So just wanted to clear that up, and now I can go ahead, put the clear on it, the gloss, and get those panel line accents in. All right, I'm calling this one done. A few things I want to mention. First of all, these dry transfers, as they're called, I am really not a fan of them. I did have a burnishing tool that helped me, rub them on, and I did tape them down as people suggested online to say, keep it in place, which makes sense. But even then, I found that as you got to some of the edges, it would, break up a bit, just a bit. And again, you can keep the rub on transfer if you still have it right there and try to rub down those edges, but sometimes they still broke. And yeah, I guess they're better than nothing. The funny thing is, I heard that this Supermodel company that had a few of these kits actually had regular water slide decals for most of their kits. It's just that a few kits had these, dry transfer rub-on decals. So enough of that, though. I did break a small strut that I replaced over here. You can see these shiny metal ones over here. And what I did is I tried to, glue it back together. Actually, one broke. And then I said, well, that's not going to work. So let me see what else I can do. And I tried some different wires to see if I can get that little loop at the end. I tried some 30 gauge wire wrap wire, which is like, looks like 10. And that was a little small scale, even for something small as this. So I just went with regular, what they call phone wire, 22 gauge wire, copper, and I tried to shape it as best as possible, and I kind of like it. It's not too bad. So I replaced those. Now, this is the first time I've done an aerial on an airplane, the thread over here. And I tried to use regular thread, which, not recommended, but if you can do it right, it doesn't look too bad. But I had a lot of trouble placing it and, getting it glued down. So what I did was I went back to this Prim elastic thread stuff that I used on one of my earlier builds, the Curtis Jenny. And I was able to have, much more success with that, but it doesn't look perfect. And what it is, it's translucent thread, and I tried to use a marker to get it a little darker so you can see the line here. And so it's not too bad, but not perfect either. But again, at least I have an aerial in there. And last thing I want to mention is I did go back in and put some Tamiya green on the light over here, on the wing light for the green one, because it was a little light, and that didn't look too bad. So as I mentioned, I went in and I put Future before I put the decals on, so it had a better surface. And then I did also panel line accents, some blacks, but I didn't go too crazy with that. And I marred it up a little bit, some places darker, like where the engines are, to show like smoke coming out and dirtying it up. But again, I didn't go too crazy on that. The only thing about this model that I'm not sure what I'm going to do is go back and I probably will put a coat of matte on it so that it's really not shiny at all, especially these decals that I find that are really too shiny. So I'll do that later on another date, but right now, the propeller works over here, and I'm happy with the kit. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, especially, giving the unknown provenance of this Supermodel company. But again, there's a lot of fiddly stuff that you got to work around with, and it's not the greatest kit, especially with the raised lines, the panel lines instead of recessed. But I was able to make something nice of it, so this is it. And what I'll do now is see if I can do some nice shots at the end of the video.
Addio piscina, ha scritto l'aviatore, per l'Africa partire dovrò, e mentre stringe la sua mamma al cuore, nascondere una lacrima non